everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I believe it's Sunday. I mean, you lose track of time. I think we're still in the book of Ezra. I'm pretty sure. And I believe I'm roughly somewhere at the end of chapter 3 with the last few things we want to talk about that we did 2 weeks ago and then move into chapter 4 this morning. That's what I'm doing. That's what I believe I'm supposed to do anyway. And so good to see all of you this morning. I went to Deborah the other day and I said, you might as well start job hunting now because I'm heading to Florida the first chance I get, with or without you. And then I looked at Orlando this morning and it's 34 degrees. So good luck with that, right? It doesn't help us at all. But I'm glad everybody's able to make it out safe today, and prayers that we can continue to be safe until this pile of snow decides to go away at some point. And certainly always good to see everybody come out to study God's Word together with us today. We are in the book of Ezra. We'll be at the end of chapter 3 here in just a moment. And if you would, let's bow our heads together and share in a word of prayer before we begin. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day that you blessed us with, an opportunity to come and gather and to study your Word, to appreciate the history of your people and how it can guide us and educate us and ultimately lead us to Jesus, and to appreciate your purposes in Him and how you fulfilled all things through Him. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for your grace and your mercy that you extend to us. There are a lot of hearts that are hurting. Our bulletin is full with those who need prayer today, Father, and we just pray your special blessings on all of them, encourage and strengthen each and every one. Thank you again for Jesus. Thank you for loving us, and we pray all this through His name. Amen. All right, so, and I believe we didn't really get a chance to talk a lot about this at the end of our study 2 weeks ago, so I wanted to come back to it. But what have they been able to build so far as it relates to the temple? Just the foundation, right? And I tried to point that out at the end of our study 2 weeks ago, that sometimes we have this imagery here that at the end of chapter 3 and the scene that unfolds is about the entirety of the temple, right? But it isn't. The reaction that happens here in a moment and between the old and the young that are present is solely based on when they see the footprint of the building, when they see the foundation laid. And the older generation see it, and how they react. How do they react? They begin to cry and weep because they remember the old one that was much larger, right? Much larger. It was quite evident just by looking at the foundation that what they were about to build was going to be significantly smaller than the original. What is the response of those who never saw that building? Yeah, they're shouting for joy, the text says. So it's an interesting kind of contrast, isn't it? You've got two kind of groups, two voices responding completely differently to the exact same situation. Can that still happen? I think it can. I think it is tempting for all of us. I was born in 1969. I'm 56 years old, and I'm starting to hit that point where you look back and go, "Wow, this isn't the way I used to see things. This isn't the way I was raised. This isn't the way." And so for all of you older folks that I have been yelling at for the last 15 years about quit looking back in the past, I now get it, right? I get it now. It's hard not to, right? That's my point. It's hard not to look backward and think about, in our minds, how wonderful that time period was, and how, in our minds, how different and worse things are presently. The truth is that may be right or wrong, right? It could be that things are presently worse than they were, or it may not be. But it is interesting to at least consider the perspectives of these two different generations. One excited about the what? About the future, right? One excited about the future of how they're about to begin to rebuild God's temple and reestablish temple worship again and reestablish the kind of worship that God desired from them. Another group disappointed, not necessarily because of what was going to happen there, but just because it just didn't feel the same. It just didn't feel the same. The temple's not going to be as big, which means there's probably not going to be as many people, right? They're building a temple that is consistent with what their needs are going to be moving forward, and that appears as a disappointment to the older ancient men. Sorry, gentlemen, that's what he called you there, right? Ancient, who were ancient men, verse 12, that had seen the first house. And here's what I want you to notice, and this is the part I really didn't get to, that I think there's reason why it's recorded here. And it, I believe, influences what happens over the next 20 or so years. So that, verse 13, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard afar off. It's interesting, right? If you were off in the distance, okay? If you were off, have you ever heard a scream from somewhere in your proximity, but not something that you visibly saw, not something you can easily and quickly ascertain what's going on here, right? And then in your mind you're going, what? Was that a laugh? Was that a cry? Was that there's a spider? Or is that I need help, right? There's difficulty distinguishing sometimes, what am I hearing? And the description Ezra gives here is, if you were off in the distance and you were listening to what was going on with this entourage of people who have gathered together to begin this construction of this building, and you might go back and go, wait a minute, why are they, I hear crying. No, that's shouting, they're shouting joy. Right? They're struggling. And there's a mixed disposition about the work they're about to take on. And I believe the reason why Ezra records that for us at the end of chapter 3, because they have already set the tone for whether they're going to have the courage to persevere through the distractions, the challenges, the difficulties, and the situations that they're going to have to be confronted with when they actually begin to construct the building. And we know from history, because we can read the whole of it, right, that it's going to take them a long time and a lot of struggles and a lot of back and forth and a lot of letter writing to people in charge to finally get it resolved and get the building built. Far longer than it should have, and I would argue far longer than it should have because, right, because they aren't seeing the work the same way. I'll pause for a second. Your thoughts. I want to share another text with you here in a minute, but give you a chance to think about that for a second. Yeah, go ahead.
If I remember right, didn't it take 40 years to build that other temple?
The original?
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look. I apologize. I didn't.
It took a lot longer than they've been back.
Right. Yeah.
They've been away for 70 years. And the people who are weeping, I mean, what are we still in a lifespan of hundreds of years, or are we back to, like 110 years or something like that? Because either they're going to be 3-year-olds when they left, or
well, they went and so the 70 years, right, was that span, and so I mean, you technically could have been 15, you'd be 85. So you could, right, you could be an older person who had the ability to see, right, to see the original and remember it, right? But it is interesting to think about, because and I think that's why he uses the word ancient men, right? They went to a lot of, it took them a lot of physical prowess to even make the trip, okay? So it took a lot of energy for them to even make the trip, and then here they are present during the foundation building, and then all of a sudden they in their mind they're thinking, wow, I made this effort to get back, and number one, I find the place in ruins, and now when we start to rebuild, this isn't going to be anything like I remember. And it certainly presents a challenge to them here. It's interesting to think about. Other thoughts you might have?
This is the only place of worship they've ever known, outside of idolatry. This is the only house of God.
Yeah.
But well, it's not even there yet, but they didn't see the old one, so there's not a comparison for them.
Right.
They're thrilled that there's going to be a house of God there.
Right. And so their excitement is legitimate in respect to that. Run to 2 Kings chapter 17 for a minute. I want to just share a parallel. I'm sorry. I said I'm ahead of myself. Zechariah is where I want to be. Zechariah chapter 4 and verse 10. I'll show it to you on the screen as well. But notice how Zechariah qualifies this situation, this same situation that we're talking about in Ezra. He said, "For who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel." Who's that? That's who we're dealing with here in Ezra, right? That's who we're dealing with. With those seven, they are the eyes of the Lord which run to and fro through the whole earth. I think Zechariah is trying to help them appreciate or give us a perspective that just because the work may seem far smaller in its quantity, in its physical size, in all of the things that we often measure greatness from, doesn't mean it doesn't have purpose. Churches don't have to be 700 members to have purpose. You don't have to be, right? You don't have to have expansions occurring every 5 years to fulfill God's purpose. We can become very enamored, right, with the idea of if the numbers aren't large, if the building isn't large, if all those things that we often attribute to greatness, we can get caught up in that and just think, well, we don't have any value at all. There's no purpose here at all. And that's a mistake. The soundness, the legitimacy, the ability to fulfill God's purposes, none of that is affected by whether the church is the same size it was from 50 years ago to today or 50 years from now. All of that is irrelevant to whether the people can serve the Lord in the manner in which God desires. And we've got to get our minds out of the quantity mindset, right? And all of the size of things, and just focus on what's in front of us. The people shouting for joy are focused on what's in front of them. The folks weeping and crying, though I perfectly understand it, are looking backwards. And it is awful hard to go anywhere forward when your head is looking in the wrong direction. And anybody that's ever put their car in drive instead of reverse, and you're looking this way and it goes that way, right? It's kind of hard to do, isn't it? Go ahead, Amy.
We often do the same thing with our own actions. We think, oh, that's too small. And we overlook the small things that we can do, thinking that it means nothing, and look for the grander things that we can, the big things we can do that we miss the opportunities to do the small things
Sure.
that really do.
And we can become, I think, overly focused on what we're not, and we fail to appreciate what we are and what we can be in that process. And I think it's going to affect them moving forward in the building of the temple. I think it's part of the reason why they struggle getting past some of the conflicts that happen, because they're not even on the same page after the foundation's built, right? That this group of people are struggling from day one, even after the foundation of the temple has been constructed after the return from captivity, and it's going to challenge them moving forward. Any other thoughts about that context? Real quick then, I'll share with you there. I think there were only 4 questions relevant in your notes or your question sheets that were relevant to chapter 3. The first was, what did Joshua the son of Jozadak and his brethren the priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and his brethren build? That's, you had to go back to the first part of the chapter, by the way. Yeah, they built the altar, right? They built the altar and began worship again, making sacrifice again to God. It was during what feast? That's question 2. Feast of the Booths, right? Or Feast of Tabernacles, which was also, in past history prior to this, was the Feast of Harvest, right? But they've yet to be there long enough to really celebrate that aspect, the harvest or first fruits. But they were wise enough to know that they were in the time period in which the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Harvest was supposed to be going on. And so they gather in Jerusalem. They build a proper altar where? Where the original one was, right? They build a proper altar and they begin the sacrifices unto their God even before the temple's built. Then the foundation gets laid. Well, I guess I answered that question for you in question 3. What work did Zerubbabel find to do? Right? So we're going to get started. We're going to get the foundation built. And what did the people sing to the Lord? Yeah, He is good. His mercy endures forever. You get that imagery, right? This kind of twofold imagery of what's happening with this situation in Ezra chapter 3. Okay, so let's jump to chapter 4 and because it almost instantaneously, when they begin the real work of constructing the temple, what happens? Yeah, people that were, and I think here's the part we sometimes forget. They come back, right? They leave Babylonian captivity after that the Medes and Persians have taken over, right? Cyrus, so just had been prophesied, Cyrus is going to let them go back. They come back, but they don't come back to a region that is. The city is desolate in the sense of the destruction that happened there, but in the region there's still people, and they're living there, right? They're living there. So don't envision particularly the region, the area, as if they just kind of marched on back down there, and there was nobody and nothing going on, and no, they get there, and in fact, they start bartering and trading and getting involved in trying to get the materials needed to build it, right? So there are people there. And so these people begin to see this temple construction. And if they have any connection to any history book, right, they can go back and maybe remember a time period when those people used to be there. Right? When that nation of people was there 70 years ago, and just prior to that, they were a pretty powerful bunch. And if we allow them to reestablish themselves here with their place of worship and the restoration eventually of the wall, and we're a little ahead of the game yet, but right, that's going to be a problem for us. That's the mindset of the inhabitants that had been living there for the prior to some of them and after the captivity in time of exile. So, verse 1, now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of that guy, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. And here's that text I mentioned earlier. I just read it wrong in my notes. Now go to 2 Kings chapter 17. I just want you to notice something that's important in the context of this conversation. 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 24. And again, I'll show it to you on the screen. So notice, he said, and the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cuthah and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim and placed them in the cities of Samaria. That's just where? That's just north, right? That's just north. Instead of the children of Israel. Now remember, when you have the divided kingdom, 10 go north, right, and become Israel. Judah and Benjamin they stay south and they become Judah, right? So notice that when they, back in Ezra 4, who'd they reference there? Who had come back? Yeah, Judah and Benjamin, they said. Now when the adversaries of those who remember, because Judah and Benjamin held on a little longer, right? And once in a while, a good king would arise. A good king would even come up even after God had pronounced what? Yeah, that their ultimate fall was coming, right? You'd still get one in that cycle. It wasn't enough to change what God intended to do, but they would have moments. So they linger a little longer. Israel fell much sooner, right? But these folks that are still there kind of remember Judah and Benjamin and the strength and power that Judah demonstrated in different ways. So they're concerned about them. And they heard that they've come back and they've begun to build the temple again unto the God of Israel. They come to Zerubbabel and the chief of the fathers and said, let us what? Yeah, let us build with you, for we seek your God, and as you do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of it, right? What we just read there in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 24, when there were those who had been sent down into that region. Generally speaking, right? Generally speaking, when these captives would end up being placed in exile in some other nation, what was one of the earliest things they began to adopt? The religion of those people, right? You think about it. The temptation of well, let's just take your mind back for a minute. Not that long in this time period here. But a big idol was made to Nebuchadnezzar, right? Made himself a god and said, when you hear the music, bow down and worship. How many of them didn't? We know of 4, right? It appears to be 4 that refused. Of all those, right? That seems to be the imagery there. That of all those that had been taken out into exile, all of those that had been taken into Babylonian captivity, when they were told, adopt the religion of the land, most of them did. These folks are arguing that when we came into this region, we adopted your God, right? We adopted your... Now, we're going to find that as you read further in history, their intents here are different, right? If you can infiltrate, it's a lot easier to cause problems, right? It's a lot easier to disrupt things if you can kind of get in among them. And so there's some of that motive here. But they're trying to make, and their idea is to make a fair argument. We came into this land, and because your God is the God of this land, this region, we've been worshiping Him, sacrificing Him, doing all the things that your God would want from us. But what is Zerubbabel and Joshua, who's we've argued is the high priest from other texts, Haggai in particular, what did they say? Yeah, you're not part of this heritage and this lineage. And just because you were moved, your exile brought you here, our exile took us there, doesn't mean you're part of this heritage and lineage of God. So they said, you don't have anything to do with us to build a house unto our God. But we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us. So right before the captivity and exile ever happens, it's prophesied who's going to come into power and let them out of this. Cyrus, right? It was prophesied before they ever went into exile. We talked about that in the early part of our study of Ezra. So Cyrus comes into power, does exactly what the prophecy said he would do. He lets them come back. Zerubbabel reminds them that listen, we're number one, we're honoring God as His heritage. Number two, we're following the commands of the king who's in charge of this region, who told us to go back and do this work. This is something we need to do. Why is there wisdom in that from Zerubbabel and Joshua and those fathers of Israel that have? Why can't they just go? Oh yeah, come on, it's fine. Let's go. Come on in and help us build this. Okay, so if the idea is to reestablish the heritage and lineage that will ultimately lead to Jesus, we've got to focus on that, right? And we've got to keep the purity, if you will, of God's plan and purpose to ultimately lead to the one seed that would save the world. And so there's dedication to God's purposes involved here. Why else?
Bringing these other people into Samaria, that was the beginning of the conflict between the Jews and the Samaritans. You see more of that in the New Testament, but there was what caused that conflict.
Yeah, this is the origins of the conflict and challenges when people traveling from Galilee even into Judea, into Jerusalem, wouldn't even traverse that area, right? So you see the origins there. I'm just trying to push here for a minute to think about why is it important if they allowed these folks that had been just kind of moved into this region to become part of the process of rebuilding this temple. What could that cause later? Let me ask you this. If you partner up with somebody and you construct something, for lack of a better question, who owns it? Both of you do. What happens when you combine forces, you build this temple, and then they decide that it's just as much ours as it is yours, and if we want to worship this way rather than the way your God has designed, how are you going to deal with that? Right? It presents a challenge. So there's all kinds of wisdom as to why Zerubbabel and Joshua say, listen, you don't have any part of this. Number one, we're under the decree of the king to come back and build this. So from a legal standpoint, this is our responsibility. From a religious standpoint, you're not part of this heritage. You're not part of the reestablishment of God's people in this place for the serving of the specific purposes that God intends for us. So how'd that go over? Not very well, right? They did not like the idea that this nation of people have reassimilated themselves back into the region. They've come back with some pieces of authority to be allowed to be there. And they, in their eyes, they have no intentions of assimilating. They have every intention of reestablishing everything based on their God, their religion, right, upon their purposes. It created, for lack of a better description, whether right or wrong, right, that's not my. It is a very natural conflict when you basically push people aside and say, no, you can't be part of this. It creates a very understandable conflict between these people, and it never stopped. Right? From this point forward, it never stopped. It was even worse in some senses, if we can qualify it that way, or at least progressively got worse.
Just talk to the woman at the well, John 4, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think that lady had, well, why is he talking to me? I'm a Samaritan.
Yeah.
Samaritans were looked down upon as second-class citizens.
Yeah.
Because they were mixed race people.
Right. And that's very true because of the way this happened. Because notice when we read in 2 Kings chapter 17, the people that had been brought into that region from all over the place, and say they were very, very mixed in that sense. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It just couldn't serve the purposes that God intended to allow His people to reestablish themselves in worship to Him, that would ultimately lead to the seed promise of Abraham that would come in Jesus. And so don't misinterpret those two things. It isn't about God's disapproval of this just based on that concept of a mixed nation. No, it was the fact that couldn't serve the purpose that God intended out of one seed to bring about the plan that would be resolved in Jesus. And I think sometimes we get that conflict that in our minds as if God was angry always and upset and didn't approve. No, it's not always about what was okay for them. Sometimes it was about what he needed to do to preserve His purposes and plan to bring about Jesus in the process.
The idea of mixing goes way back. He told them, don't marry the people of that land. So this division goes way back to Israel's earliest.
Right. And that was about them. That was about Israel's responsibilities because they had a specific purpose to be fulfilled. It didn't have anything to do with any other nation. It only had to do with them because of their responsibilities to bring about the lineage of Jesus. And that's the conflict sometimes we forget, that it wasn't across the board condemnation. It was a presentation of law to them. And quite frankly, they were the only ones under the Mosaic law, right? They were the only ones that law was given to. Any other thoughts?
It's like, well, if we can't help them, then we're just going to slow down.
Yeah. So if we can't be part of it, we're gonna fight it, and we're gonna see that happening.
Part of this mixed people that were in this land, part of them were Israelites, because when they were dispersed, the Babylonians especially took the better group of people, the artisans and so forth, and took them to benefit Babylon, and left some of the others behind. So some of these people probably did worship
The only thing they knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is much like what happened when they came out of Babylonian captivity, right? Because they said, if you couldn't prove that you were part of a certain heritage, then they wouldn't permit certain connectivities. All right, go ahead, Amy.
Calls them adversaries or enemies of Benjamin and Judah anyway, so that woman already addressed
Before they ever got there.
Who are.
Yeah, before they ever got there. Yeah, which would be a remnant of Israelites, or the tribe of the northern tribes, Israel. That remnant that had left there were already in conflict with Judah and Benjamin before they ever left. So I agree. It's going to get challenging here in the next few verses. Here's my piece of advice. We'll spend a little time trying to figure out which Ahasuerus am I talking about? Which Darius am I talking about? Which Cyrus am I talking about? Which Artaxerxes am I talking about? Which Xerxes am I talking about? Do they have any other names? Yeah, Cambyses, Cerdus, Longimus, right? So don't spin your wheels and miss the point of what this next segment is driving at. What you're going to see unfold is basically lawsuits, right? They get counselors, they draft lawsuits, letters that they send back to the leadership in hopes of getting somebody to stop the progress of the building of the temple. And will they succeed in getting some guys to push at least the pause button? Yeah, they're gonna find at least one of these rulers who'll say, yeah, okay, tell them to stop until I can start digging through the archives and figure out whether Cyrus actually made this decree or not. And it's going to take some time, but eventually they'll figure out he did, right? View the first 23 verses or so, especially of chapter 4, not so much a timeline, right? It's not so much a chronological timeline of events as it is just a description of the history of events that happened over a period of time. Because if we're trying to figure out in a timeline in chapter 4, because 1 minute, because he'll leapfrog. They'll leapfrog leaders, right? Because he's just trying to build a basic, generic, historical picture of what was going on over a long stretch, in some senses, years of time. And I'll stop and we'll pick that up.